Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry, Havoc!
I think there's a very specific tone that Shakespeare had for this thing, and I think all actors want to interpret things.
Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates.
I think he really had it down, a great judge of human nature, and that's why he's been around for so long.
He reads much. He is a great observer, and he looks quite through the deeds of men.
He's a better poet than we will ever be actors. And the language that he gives us as actors, the things that we get to say, are so delicious and so wonderful.
And this man is now become a god. And Cassius is a wretched creature, and must bend his body if Caesar carelessly but nod on him.
If people have power and other people allow them to have it, they get what they deserve. And power is always being abused. Shakespeare saw it in his day. It's always been going on.
Et tu, Brute, then fall, Caesar.
I think you see these passages of Shakespeare almost become etched in your mind because of the beauty, the cadence, the rhythm. I mean, it's really like poetry.
With this I depart, that as I slew Caesar for the good of Rome, I have the same dagger for myself when it shall please my country to need my death.
Live, Brutus! Live! Live!
When you imagine the audience that he was playing to, people in a pit, like, you know, taking legs off pigs, and the kind of people that they were performing in front of, to have such an amazing command of the language, and yet he had to make his points quickly, you know, because those people were going to start throwing those pig legs at you at a certain point. If you, I mean, that was really a rowdy audience. That
he was the Aaron Spelling of his day, evidently.
Brando's interpretation of the famous funereal speech is fascinating because his interpretation of it is he's really speaking to the Roman citizens.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears!
So instead of a great oration with the bombast that you've seen many actors perform, that friends, Romans, countrymen, in this great sort of over-the-top rendition, he actually talks to the Romans. If you remember that scene, one of the most famous scenes in, I think, probably cinematic history.
I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? Oh, judgment, thou art led to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason.
There's a timeless quality to Marlon's work. He came with a kind of visceral power and an emotional commitment that is very rarely seen when playing Shakespeare.
Judge, O ye gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all.
Obviously, this fellow had a tremendous grasp on getting inside the human psyche.
I was 13 years old. I was working in Shakespeare in San Diego at in Balboa Park at the Old Globe Theater. I saw in 1 week 2 performances. One was Montgomery Clifton Place in the Sun, and the other was Marlon in Viva Zapata. And those 2 performances changed my whole way of thinking about acting. It took the act out of acting.
It was much more what I would term sort of a Zen approach, which is just kind of let it flow. And I think that's probably why some of his portrayals are so moving and so powerful, because it's not forced. It's not constrained by conscious thought trying to direct it or indicate where it's going.
Take your flag with you.
I remember one of his words of wisdom was that when you go to the movies, you sit there with your popcorn, and you're doing that, and you're looking up at the screen, and the trick is to get them to go,
You bloody bastard! You'll not put your foot on me again.
There's a timeless quality to Marlon's work. There's a timeless quality to Don Vito Corleone. There's a timeless quality to Paul from Last Tango in Paris. There's a nakedness. There's a willingness to just be completely naked and available.
the guy was a terrific talent. No matter what he was playing, he had that magic of saying things that you would believe, and you'd want to see more.
There'll be no more killing aboard this ship, not even Captain Bligh.
If that's an attempt to earn clemency, I spit on it.
You remarkable pig. You can thank whatever pig god you pray to, you haven't quite turned me into a murderer.
He kind of was the cat that introduced this kind of naturalistic style. Talk about Stanley Kowalski, for example. The character that he created for Streetcar that he did on the stage, I think he was 20-something when he did it. And everybody was talking about his animal magnetism, and everybody was talking about his sexuality and his intelligence, and that it was raw, and it was all this stuff. Well, it was all those things, but it was a character. And I think a lot of people mistook that for an acting style, when the reality was he just presented this character that we had not seen in the language of the American theater or in the language of American cinema. We hadn't seen this working class guy.
Who was an animal.
Yeah.
I think more process, sort of the difference between people that want to get to the end or they want to enjoy the journey, that sort of dharma versus objective type psychology. And I think he was more a dharma bum, a traveler.
Going round the Horn will take 5 months off our journey.
Well, we shall have ourselves quite a little adventure.
My great friend and collaborator John Milius's film, Apocalypse Now, again, this interpretation of Colonel Kurtz is, I think, you don't have to be a great student of just cinema to appreciate the artistry of what he accomplished in that, because that really is the man that's gone off the tracks. That's really where the car heads into the jungle, and look at that portrayal.
Marlon didn't want me on the set when he did his thing, so he would work, and then one night, and then I would come in the next night, and I would work. Then he would come in and react to what I did, and we did that for probably about 14 days, couple weeks. And one night I came in, they said, last night Marlon called you a whimpering dog and threw bananas at you. So all night long, Tommy Shaw was throwing bananas at me. Yeah.
To me, it's more sort of like a Zen approach. I mean, this is not one of those forced issues. It doesn't seem to me like he was someone that was actually struggling to remember the lines or really having to fight his way into the character.
Every now and again, like every couple of years, we would just find each other and talk. And by that time, I had gained an appreciation of his work. I think I saw Waterfront for the first time as an adult when I was 30 or so. Wow. And then, I got to Streetcar. Because remember, when we worked on the picture together, I was like, Marlon Brando, who's that? That old man? He don't even bother to remember his lines. He's crazy. He can't be acting. That's where I was at 14 years old.
That's why you were so good, too.
Thank you.
I said to him, I hear all these stories about how you want to rewrite everything. So why don't we rewrite it now? Before we start shooting it. We had a week or two to rehearse, and I said, let's get it just the way you like it. So we spent a lot of time together, which was funny because the guy never stopped telling jokes. He had a great sense of humor. So anyway, finally the first day of shooting arrives. We're in Newhall out at the oil pumps, and I drive up and an assistant runs and says, Mr. Brando wants to see you. I said, oh, okay. So I go over to his trailer, and he's sitting there with the script, and he says, I can't say this shit. I said, well, let's find some shit you can't say. And we spent another delightful morning changing all the lines again.
Best laid plans. But you and I are going to rectify that, aren't we?
His character wore a hearing aid. when in fact it was so his dialogue could be delivered to him from this little tape recorder he carried in his waistband, and he could flex his stomach, and that would activate a power switch in this thing, would turn it on and off by how he was flexing.
Well, let's take a little walk. Do you mind if I get on this side? I got bum ears.
Sure.
My machine's on this side. Well,
And he would hear the dialogue read in his ear, and then he would say the line. So we had this endless Steadicam shot with him and Scott walking down this road with their entourage behind them, and page after page of dialogue is going by, and then suddenly Marlon stopped. I said, "What happened?" He said, "I ran out of tape." And I said, "Come on, when you did On the Waterfront, you memorized your lines. You didn't have cue cards all over the place so you wouldn't have to memorize it. Why don't you memorize your lines?" He said, "Because I don't have to."
He may have been difficult, but what he achieved was difficult.
He was so wanted that this would be tolerated, that he could get away with that. And the little boy in him enjoyed that.
Which brings me to the subject of yourself. I will tolerate nothing less than a man's best efforts, officer or seaman. High-born connections are no substitute for hard work.
No, indeed they're not, sir. But personally, I see no reason why a good officer cannot be a gentleman as well. Do you disagree, sir?
Not if he's first a good officer.
It's a debatable point.
I watched him on Sayonara, which is when I was under contract to Warner Brothers. And Josh Logan was directing, and he hated Logan. And he just dismissed him. But they were setting up the camera for this scene, and Marlon was on the other side of camera with the young woman that he is going to perform with. I don't think that she had much acting experience. And he was talking to her, and he was playing with her hair, and he was whispering in her ear, and so on and so forth, and talking there. And then when it came sort of time for them to get, he wandered her over in front of the camera and continued the conversation. And then when Logan, "Okay, now we're ready," he said, "Shh, quiet, quiet." Tell him when to roll, and he said, "Roll," and so on. And he continued what he was doing on the other side of camera, in front of the camera. And I went, wow.
When Steve Shakin and I went up to meet him for the first time to work with him, he said to me he was going to play an oil mogul. And he said, "You know what, I think this guy maybe he lives out in the desert and has a beard and a straw hat, and he walks around in his bare feet and has a big dish, and that's how he stays. He's a real sort of Howard Hughes eccentric." So I said, "Well, you could do that." I had an image of a much more conventional three-piece suit guy who's on the cover of Time magazine, like an Armand Hammer or somebody like that. And he looked at me for a long time. He said, "Yeah, you see, I was just testing you."
That process of just being who he is probably affected his career negatively, probably pretty dramatically, I think, because I know there were great gaps.
But I don't make the rules around here. I just work here.
Before the Godfather comeback, there had been a great hiatus of work.
It's hard to put that part of his life into perspective, because it seemed like he didn't care about the money, people's money. As a matter of fact, in a way, I feel that he felt that they were there to just be taken by, by talent.
You trade lives and human dignity for profit.
Money, not morality, is the principal commerce of civilized nations. Thomas Jefferson, 200 years ago.
I remember one of his conditions of employment was that he would be paid each day, sort of COD, and would be cash. And a guy would show up from MGM with an attaché case with cash, and that would cover the day's work. And I said to him, "You're every boy's dream. Everybody would like to go to work that way, get paid in cash that day. And if you can pull that off, God bless you." He said, yeah, that's how I feel.
I think also his, his choices about lifestyle and about, I guess, he was a huge fan after the bounty of Tahiti and the French Polynesia and living there and kind of, going off the main road and finding his own path probably had a big effect on him.
Big bongo player. Half his bedroom was occupied with bongos and conga drums, and he played pretty well, too.
He was so sensitive and so acutely aware of the world in which he lived and the things that were happening in the world and the things that were wrong with the world really affected him, I think.
He was a big ham radio operator because he could talk to people around the world and nobody would know it's him. I think that often fame and celebrity takes a toll on somebody and they don't want it to get in the way of people dealing with them. Some love it and put on airs. He was the opposite of that and was constantly hoping that somebody would be dealing with him as another person rather than an icon, if you will.
Human beings, my friend, are a very complex paradox and very, very dangerous. They don't want to be leaders, they want to be followers. I mean, they can't wait to find some nut who they think is just wonderful to tell them what to do. And they all want to be brought under control. Now, some of that awesome burden has fallen on my sagging shoulders. I didn't ask for it, and I don't enjoy it, but I accept it because I have a strong sense of duty.
I cannot discredit him in any way because what he achieved is so, even in the later films, the little comedies and the things that he did, he was still brilliant. I would blame Hollywood more than Marlon, like not having the imagination to come up with things for him to really do. That's all they had to do was come up to him and say, gee, you've been doing this shit, Marlon. We got this wonderful part we want you to play, you know? You think he would have turned them down?
I believe I did what honor dictated, and that belief sustains me. Except for a slight desire to be dead, which I'm sure will pass.
Oh, yes. God bless you, sir.
He was really a compassionate human being. And he was very much, of an artistic kind of temperament. So if you think about Streetcar, Wild One, Waterfront, Julius Caesar, and then on the other side, and then you go Godfather, Last Tango in Paris, and The Freshman. If it was just that, if it was just those seven, that he's achieved greatness, absolutely.
These particular films are no longer just entertainment. They actually are part of the psyche of an entire culture, a Western culture.
He was the greatest actor in films in the 20th century. There was no one that could come close to him, really.
His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man.
And Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry, Hamlet!
I think there's a very specific tone that Shakespeare had for this thing, and I think all actors want to interpret things.
Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates.
I think he really had it down, a great judge of human nature, and that's why he's been around for so long.
He reads much. He is a great observer, and he looks quite through the deeds of men.
He's a better poet than we will ever be actors. And the language that he gives us as actors, the things that we get to say, are so delicious and so wonderful.
And this man is now become a god. And Cassius is a wretched creature and must bend his body if Caesar carelessly but nod on him.
When it shall please my country to need my death.
Live, Brutus! Live! Live!
When you imagine the audience that he was playing to, people in a pit, like, you know, taking legs off pigs, and the kind of people that they were performing in front of, they have such an amazing command of the language, and yet he had to make his points quickly, you know, because those people were going to start throwing those pig legs at you at a certain point. If you, I mean, that was really a rowdy audience. That
he was the Aaron Spelling of his day, evidently.
Brando's interpretation of the famous funereal speech is fascinating because his interpretation of it is he's really speaking to the Roman citizens.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears!
So instead of a great oration with the bombast that you've seen many actors perform, that friends, Romans, countrymen, in this great sort of over-the-top rendition, he actually talks to the Romans. If you remember that scene, one of the most famous scenes in, I think, probably cinematic history.
I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause.
If people have power and other people allow them to have it, they get what they deserve. And power is always being abused. Shakespeare saw it in his day. It's always been going on.
Et tu, Brute, then fall, Caesar.
I think you see these passages of Shakespeare almost become etched in your mind because of the beauty, the cadence, the rhythm. I mean, it's really like poetry.
With this I depart, that as I slew Caesar for the good of Rome, I have the same dagger for myself.